Do y'all remember being locked into one aesthetic? Just me? For the people who are extremely confused, Woozworld is a social MMO that is still alive and well, even if they changed it so much from how it originally looked and felt. Whether you are a former Woozin, a current Woozin, a returning Woozin, or someone who has never heard of Woozworld, welcome to Nostalgia Bait. Woozworld actually didn't start off as Woozworld. The game started in 2007 as Kid Studio by the company Tribal Nova. It was aimed at a slightly younger demographic and eventually relaunched as Woozworld in 2009, which would be a few months before I started playing Woozworld myself. And if you watched my previous videos and wonder how I played so many social MMOs as a kid, I just didn't have many friends when I was younger. Unlike other games at the time, you were locked into a specific nations with a Z on each Woozin you had. You were allowed 4 Woozins, or avatars, on an account, so you could have one per nations, but your first one was always your main one. There was Mystic Alley, Cortoza, Colony V, and Lip Street. Each one had a Woozband member tied to them. Jenny Woos represented Mystic Alley, a lush fantasy nation that is the embodiment of a fairy tale. Maya Woos represented Colony V, the futuristic nations that looked like it came out of a sci-fi. Jay Woos represented Lip Street, the more modern-looking nations that had bustling towns and cities. Max Woos represented Cortoza, a dark and mysterious nations that looked spooky. And if you are confused, the Woozband are a group of game mascots / characters that make up the earliest lore and are still around to this day. I remember picking Mystic Alley as my first one, and Jenny Woos is still my favorite member of the Woozband, even though now I know that she, Max, and Jay left a few years ago, and now Maya's the only remaining member left from that era, which I actually found out when I hopped back on after all these years. Although we have combined nations now and everyone isn't restricted to their own nations anymore, we do have an explanation as to why the nations were split in the first place. Using distinctly Woozified Greek gods, we have lore as to which god ruled which nations. The first goddess is Zeus. She is the goddess that created Colony V as a utopia filled with advanced technology, optimism, and light. The next god is Hades, Hades with a Z, who is Zeus's older brother and was given rule over Cortoza. Although Cortoza looks dark and gloomy, it surprisingly is a place for creativity, romance, and humor. The next 2 gods are twins. Zapala looks over the nation of the sun, or Lip Street, a place for joy seekers, laughter, and endless adventures, while his sister Artemis looks over Mystic Alley, a place guided by the moon, a calmer, serene place compared to Lip Street. And past my time on Woozworld, they added Hollywoos. Ruled by Dionysus, this nations is a place of eternal celebration. I kinda wish we had Hollywoos back in the day, cause we had a lot of lore and events back then that talked about fame and partying, and it would have fit in. But I feel like it would have been heavily disliked because the fandom usually had mixed reactions to heavy changes in lore and aesthetics. Woozworld has seen many milestones and changes since the beginning. By October 2010, it had 1 million registrations only a year after its release. In the same article by Newswire, it also talks about Woozworld partnering with major companies like Facebook, Wallycard, and Zong, the latter 2 being payment methods. There's a lot of articles out there that give a better timeline of how Woozworld grew, but to keep this video from feeling like a true deep dive, I will only list a few things. In Woozworld's own media kit from 2010, they explained that they wanted to let tweens to take control of their environment. Woozworld is one of the few social MMOs from before the 2010s that has lasted the downfall of Flash Player. It originally was made in Flash, but soon moved to Unity, and a lot of fans of the game now wish that it wasn't changed so heavily after the fact, from what I've seen on social media. I remember how the game was like when I was playing it, and Woozworld has aesthetically changed so much. This is going to make me sound like a boomer, so bear with me. When I started playing Woozworld, it would have been very early on when it launched, or around mid-2010. Back then, everything was simplistic. There wasn't much shading on items, and clothes were fairly basic compared to what they have now. Items like the fancy coffee table and metal fence were everywhere. We didn't have as many items back then, so we made do with what we can. And you would see the metal fence as a stand-in for walls and barriers because it was so easy to obtain and use. I've noticed as I look at Woozworld now, a lot of the older, more simple items have either been lost to time or placed into backstores, which I understand because they aren't as aesthetically pleasing as the newer, more detailed items. I remember items like the fancy coffee table and the Yeti were coveted. If you had one or multiple, depending on the area you played in, you would have been seen as one of the rich or popular users. The fancy coffee table definitely was more popular early on than the Yeti, but I still remember one of my friends at the time being treated way better than I did because she looked richer. In Woozworld, both back then and supposedly even to this day, if you looked rich or looked cool, you were pretty much looked up at. But I think that happens on every social MMO. Bullying was rampant back then, and I remember being made fun of a few times because I wasn't someone that followed the trends in the game. Though I think seeing the ratings on commonsensemedia.org shows that nothing has changed bullying and harassment-wise. Outside of the negatives of the game, the community back then did come up with many ways to roleplay and entertain ourselves. Adoption centers, hotels, quiz shows, shops, and even matchmaking services were fairly common even in the beginning of the game when the nation's restrictions were removed. Come to think of it, why were hotels a thing back then as roleplay units? On the topic of the nation's unification, older accounts were grandfathered into the new system, so older accounts kept the amount of Woozband they made when the game was divided, but newer accounts were only allowed one. This made things more complicated for people who wanted to get access to their old accounts, but forgot what the name of their first Woozband was. Since Woozworld only kept the first Woozband name and then changed all the other ones to Woozband followed by a big string of numbers. I don't remember my old account, so I won't be able to get screenshots of it. And I'm not sure the exact year when the switch between Divided Nations and United Nations happened. I just know it happened during my time playing Woozworld, but way before I stopped playing and moved on to other games. So I can really only describe how my Woozband looked like very early on in my memories of what was popular. The earliest edition of my Woozband had the long braided hair tied back, and the creepy wide-eyed smile that was common back in the day. And I wish I was joking, but that face is etched into my brain. I can't forget how creepy it looked. My second version of my Woozband was more scene/emo inspired. I would have been in my teen years before 2015 or maybe 2016. One thing that never changed between both was the sheer amount of blue I used in my units or my Woozband. I also remember Deadmau 5 being a major part of Woozworld for a short period of time. The Deadmau collection was extremely popular and it was trendy to wear a piece of the collection. I'm surprised I even remember so much about the old Woozworld compared to what I remember about Our World or Super Secret. I guess that's because it was one of the few social MMOs that I played for hours and didn't have to pay for stuff, at least early on. On a more current note, there's been some speculations from players that Woozworld might eventually be shut down completely. If you look at stat tracking sites, Woozworld doesn't have as many players as it used to back in its prime. This is most likely because games like Roblox have become a major hub for tweens and teens. And from what I'm seeing, Woozworld still isn't dead, but the dedicated active fan base is much smaller and older than their targeted demographic from years prior. Like a lot of social MMOs from the 2000s and 2010s, Woozworld has been beloved by the people that grew up playing it, and like how modern-day Woozworld is beloved by the teens that play it now, old Woozworld has a place in my heart. Although I do like how detailed and pretty everything is now, I do miss when things were more simple and rough around the edges, but I guess the era of Deadmau 5 has long since passed. Thanks for watching, see y'all next time.